Code Explain says hi. So in today's part, we're going to add some animations to our app. So we're going to animate like the modal, which we use in both when adding the new to-do and adding a new project. We're going to animate this arrow here. So when I click on it, it's going to be spinning, and also closing and opening the menu here. The same functionality for the projects. And also when I click on the pencil here, you can see that we have some transitions here between these buttons and the number of to-dos of each project. Also when I click here, you're gonna see some transitions when I check a to-do. So this circle here fades out or scaled down to 0, and this one scales up to 1. When I add a new to-do, I'm gonna, for example, say test. Add to do, you can see the animation when it's been added. The same animation is going to be used when I add a new project, like I'm going to say test add project. To handle all these animations, we're going to use React Spring. So first, let's go and see the logic behind this. So we're going to use React Spring as a library for the animations. Why we need to use React Spring? Because it uses Spring physics-based animation, which is really great, and it also uses custom hooks, which is another great thing about React Spring. So we're going to be using use Spring and use transition hooks or custom hooks for this project. There are like 3 other more custom hooks, but we're gonna stick with these because they are really enough to do animations. Also, the animation with React Spring is being done using less code, which is really important thing to have. Alright, for the installation, we're going to run npm install React Spring to install React Spring, and this is the version we're gonna work with in this project. So if you're coming for the future, make sure you install this same version. Now let's go and talk about the custom hook, the first one, which is use Spring. So let's say we have a box, a div, that says hello world. And all I want to do is just make this fade in, which means I'm just gonna play with opacity. So I'm gonna go from opacity 0 to opacity 1. In this case, all I need to do is I'm gonna put this inside an object called from, and this inside an object called to. So I'm gonna go from opacity 0 to opacity 1. Then I'm gonna wrap this inside an object and pass this to my function useSpring. useSpring is my custom hook, which is just a special function. Of course, before using it, we need to bring it first from React Spring. And now whatever my useSpring will return is going to be the animation. I'm going to set that to my constant called fade in. Now, if I go and take a look on that constant fade in, I'm going to find it's an object, and it has a property called opacity, which is the property, the stasis property we're playing with. But here, the opacity is not 0 or 1, it's an object. An object with a bunch of properties that I don't understand, that we don't know how to use them. To use these properties here, you need to bring in the animated component from React Spring. This animated here will know exactly what to do and handle the animations using what your useSpring will return. So here, to apply this animation to your dev, you need to use animated.dev. If it was a span, it's going to be animated.span, etc. Now I'm going to use the style prop and I'm going to pass in the fade in, and this will make our box fade in when mounted. Now let's say I have my box, but I want it not to just fade in, I want it also to fade in and go to the left. So in that case, I'm going to go and pass 2 stasis properties, to, from, and to. So I'm going to pass opacity 0 and 1. This is to make it fade in. And to move it to the left, I'm going to play with the right position. So I'm going to go from 0 pixels to 12 pixels. This will make this box go from the right to the left. Here, I want just to make sure that you know that if you use the unit pixels here, you must stick with the same unit. If you use pixels here and rems here, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. You're going to get an error. So make sure you use the same units. And also I can use right only if this box here has already the position set to absolute or like relative, etc. Now let's go and see one more example. Let's say that I have my dev, and this time I want my dev to fade in not when mounting but when I click on a button. So when I click on show, I will make this fade in, and when I click on it, I want this to disappear. So in that case, I'm gonna like control the state of these box here using a state called show. I'm gonna set it to false, so by default this will be hidden, and then all I need to do is I'm gonna go to my button and add an onClick event. I'm gonna run my function setShow, and I'm gonna pass in not show. So when I click on this, if it was false, it's gonna be true. If it was true, it's not gonna be false. And now to create the animation, I'm gonna use Spring. This time I'm gonna use from and to. I'm just gonna pass in an object, and I'm gonna say opacity directly. And here I'm gonna set opacity to 1 if show is true, and to 0 if show is false. And this will create the animation we want. So this object here also takes in some other properties, not just to and from. You can use like config, so to play like with the duration or fractions, etc. We're gonna see that when we get to when we code this actually. Now let's go and see or talk about the use transition. For the use transition, we need to bring that first, of course, and you can use transition for arrays to toggle between components or mounting and mounting of the same component. In our case, it's going to be just for toggling between components. So if you see here that when I click on this icon, we toggle between these components, and also here we toggle between the check, circle, and the circle. So if I go and take a look on the documents on the React Spring website, this is what I get. So we have here an example of toggling between two components, and this is the same code that we're going to be using for our project. Now here's the code I've got from documentations to toggle between two components. Now we're going to toggle between two components in two cases, in our to-do component and in our project component. So I'm gonna just do the example for the project component, and it's gonna be almost the same thing for our to-do component. Now if you remember, our project component takes in as props the project itself that we need to render and the edit here. So edit here is responsible to render one of these buttons. So if edit is true, we're gonna render these buttons here, and if it's false, we're gonna render the number of the to-dos in that project, if there is any, of course. Now you can see exactly here that we have two components. We have this first component, and this is our second component. Just like here, we have this first component and this one here. So I'm just gonna go and use animated for both of them like they did here. So I'm just copying the code here. Now I'm gonna go and create my function button transitions using the use transition hook. So the use transition hook here returns a function, not an object like we've seen with the use Spring. So here you can see that the use transition here takes in toggle, and toggle here is going to be either false or true. So for us, it's going to be this edit here. So edit is going to be either false or true. If it's false, we're going to show this. If it's true, we're going to show this. So then an object which has these properties. So here they are like toggling between these two components automatically using this onRest method. So I'm not going to use these four properties here because edit is going to be toggled by the user when he clicks on the pencil icon. So I'm just going to use from, enter, and leave. So from here is the values we need our buttons to start with, or the component to start with. So opacity is 0, and then right is -20 pixels. So I'm using right here because these two elements here, their position is set to absolute, so I have the right to use right, top, left, etc. Now the animation will start with opacity set to 0 and from minus 20 pixels to the right, and then when it enters it's gonna go from opacity 0 to opacity 1, then from minus 20 pixels to 0 pixels for the right, which will make the component move from the right to the left. Now when this enters, this will leave from opacity 1 to 0 and from right 0 to minus 20 pixels. So when this enters, this will leave, and when this enters, this will leave. Now I'm gonna use my function here, my function button transitions. This function here takes in a callback function. That callback function receives two arguments, props, an item, and it's gonna return some JSX. Alright. Now in this example they destructured opacity because they are using here opacity, but I'm not gonna destructure any of these two here. I'm just gonna use the whole thing, so I'm just gonna call it props. So props is just this object they destructured here, and then item is gonna be item. I can call it whatever I want, of course. And now I'm gonna do the same thing we did before. I'm just gonna use style and pass in the props here and do the same thing for the other component. Now here, instead of edit, I'm gonna use item instead. And that's all we need to make the transition to happen. Now let's go and see this in action. So as you can see here, we have no animations yet, which we need to do in this part, but first we need to grab the files from the part 23. I'm gonna paste the link to that folder into .git and download the folder. Go into that folder, run npm install, so you'll be good to go. If you already have the files, just open your text editor. The first thing we're going to animate is our modal, so I'm going to components, modal, but still we need first to npm install React Spring library. So we need to wait for this to install. And now just to remind you, I'm gonna show you the version of React Spring we're using in this project. Now I'm gonna go to the modal. The first thing is importing use Spring customer hook and animated from React Spring. Now at the bottom here, I'm gonna create those animations. I'm gonna create a constant called modal animation, and then I'm gonna call my custom hook use Spring. I'm gonna pass in an object. So I'm gonna set opacity to 1 if show modal is true, and to 0 if it's false. So here we need to use animated. So to animate this dev, just a container, not the whole modal. And then I'm gonna pass in the modal animation using style. Now if I hit save and then go and open that modal, you can see that it fades in. But we still need to add some other properties here like top to change the position of the modal. So it's gonna come from 25% to 0. So it's gonna come from top to bottom. The same thing when we add a new project, because they're both using the modal. Now I'm gonna use config to set the fraction to 10. If I save, now you can see this beautiful animation. Now I'm gonna need to spin this icon or arrow when I click on it. So I'm gonna go to color.js and I'm gonna create some animations here. We need to import use Spring and animated first. So I'm gonna create a const called spin use Spring and then pass in an object. So I'm gonna use transform here, and I'm gonna transform that based on show menu, a state we need to create. Then I'm gonna rotate this to 0 degrees if show menu is true, and to 180 degrees if show menu is false. So I'm gonna go and create that state. So we need this state to like keep track of the menu. So if it's shown, the show menu is true. If it's not shown, the show menu is false. So this will be toggled when I click on the button, the arrow button. So here I need to go to this button here and add animated. And also I need to like add or pass in the spin using style. And here I also need to add the onClick event to toggle show menu. So this is the button we use. So when I click on this, we show menu. If I click on it again, we're gonna hide the menu. So I'm just gonna use set show menu and set it to not show menu. So here if I go and click on it, you can see that it's spin. Now I'm just gonna use friction again. I'm gonna set it to 10, save. You can see that beautiful animation again. Now the menu doesn't like collapse, so I'm gonna go and create some animations for that. So menu animation. I'm gonna use spring again. This time I'm gonna play with display. So I'm gonna hide and display the menu on show menu. So if it's true, I'm gonna show it. If it's false, I'm gonna hide it. So we need to add this to this dev with the class name item. And then we need to pass in that animation, the menu animation. So if I hit save and then go and try this, I have a problem there. So a dev, just remove that. So now if I click on that, you can see that my menu hides. But still, I'm gonna add another property, which is line height. So on show menu, the line height will be 1.2. If it's true, it's gonna be, if it's false, it's gonna be 0. Now you can see that it gives the feeling that the menu is opening. Now the same logic will be, or the same animation will happen for the projects. So I'm just gonna copy those, go to projects.js. Just here I'm gonna paste in those animations. We need to import use spring and animated, of course, and we have already show menu there, so we don't need to create that. So here I'm gonna add an onClick event to toggle between false and true for our show menu, or to hide and show the menu. And then we need to pass in the animation span. We need to use animated, of course. If I save, you can see that it's working, but with some lag in there. We're gonna fix that in a second. And there for the items, I need, of course, to use animated again, and then pass the animation, the right animation, which is the menu animation. So if I save, you can see that the animation is working, but this lag in here is caused by something in CSS. So I'm gonna go to app.css. I'm gonna search for transition. So I figured out that when I use transition on those arrows, and when I use all, transition all, this causes the problem. So I'm just gonna say background, and I actually don't know exactly why this happens, but this is how I fixed the issue. So I'm just gonna use background instead of all. So now if I click on that arrow, you can see that the animation is working just fine. Now we're done with our menus. I'm gonna close this, and then I'm gonna go to animate, or to do some transitions with my buttons, or the buttons for the project. So now I'm gonna create a const called fade in. So I need my project when added to fade in. So I'm gonna start from margin top. So I'm just gonna play here with margin top. So I want to my project when it's been added or mounted to start from top to margin 0 to its real place. And then I'm gonna play with opacity to fade in that project name. So I need to say here use spring. So I need to use animated on the whole dev. This is our project, the whole project. So I'm gonna pass in fade in. I need animated here also. So if I save, you can see that the projects come in like from top and fade in. If I try to add other, you can see the animation when it's been added. So it starts from top because of the margin top and fade in because of the opacity. Now I'm gonna create some transitions for my buttons there, which we've seen in the logic part. This is gonna be toggled based on edit. And then we need a from property. I'm gonna play with the opacity and right. I'm just gonna call this enter, then this is gonna be leave. On enter, the opacity is gonna be 1 and the right is gonna be set to 0. Now button transition is gonna be a function, so I'm just gonna cut that. It's gonna take in a callback function and return the GSX we already had before. The two arguments gonna be props and edit, or I'm just gonna call this edit project. I can actually call this anything you want. You call it item, I'm gonna call it edit project. Now this must have the animated, and then I'm gonna pass the props, and that's it. So now if I save and I'm gonna go and click on those, you can see the transition. So cool. Now we need to go and do almost the same thing in our to-do component. So here I'm gonna add animations here, but first we need to bring in the use spring, use transition, and animated. Actually, I'm just gonna go to project and copy the fade in, because also the to do will fade in just like the project did. I'm gonna pass in fade in here to the animated, and also we need to say animated. So if I save now, you can see here that if I refresh, you can see the animation happens when the to-dos mounts in. I'm gonna also copy paste in the button transitions. I'm gonna call this check transitions, and this is gonna be happening on to-do.checked. Here I'm gonna use position set to absolute, and I'm gonna use transform this time because I want to scale up and down the icons. So I'm gonna scale it from 0 to 1. So on enter it's gonna be 1 and leave is gonna be 0. So if I save, I see absolute. I need to make this a string. Okay, now here instead of just using a ternary to show the buttons, I'm gonna use my function check transition. I'm gonna paste in .jsx inside. Now instead of to do .checked, it's gonna be just checked, and I'm gonna name this checked. I can name it whatever I want, of course. Now I'm gonna use animated again, and then I need to pass down those props, and that's it. Now if I go and save and click on those buttons, you can see that they are working, but we have just some CSS problems that we need to fix. So I'm just gonna go and search for to do. Then just here I'm gonna add the styling from the check to do, which is the container of our circles there, the circle and the circle check. I'm going to use display flex to center horizontally and vertically those icons, and I'm going to set the width 15 pixels, and you can see that it's been fixed. Alright, so now you can see that all the animations have been done so easily with React Spring. Now the last thing I will do is I'm going to go into the add new to do component, and here I'm going to pass in an argument for my random color, and I'm going to set the luminosity to dark. So I need the colors to be dark because I really don't like those colors. So now if I try to add in a new to do, you can see that we get a dark color, which is really nice and visible. There's 3, so now I can see that we get just the dark colors instead of these light colors. So the animations are done. That's it for this part. I hope you learned how to do animations, even if this was quick, but I hope you learned something. Take care, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and see you in the next part, which is going to be the last part in this course, which is going to be about deployment. We're going to deploy our app. So take care and see you in the next part.